Welcome to the Love Thy Lawyer podcast, where we talk to attorneys about their lives and careers. I'm your host, Louis Goodman. Today, we welcome Brett Trembly to the program. Mr. Trembly is the founding partner of the Trembly Law Firm, a Miami-based business and franchise firm. He is also the co-founder and CEO of Get Staffed Up, the largest virtual staffing company in the United States. He's been featured on numerous law and business podcasts. Brett Trembly, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Louis, thank you so much for having me. And one quick amendment. We are the largest virtual staffing company for lawyers and law firms in the U.S. The amount of money that's poured into the space recently, we can no longer claim we're the biggest. So,
But you're big.
yeah, relatively, right? We're getting there.
By the way, can you tell us how to get in touch with you if someone needs virtual staffing? Can you give us that website?
Sure. It's just like it sounds, getstaffedup.com, GETSTAFFEDUP.com. But, I also like when people just reach out to me on LinkedIn or add me on LinkedIn. So just my name, Brett Trembly. I think I'm the only one on LinkedIn. At least it should be clear if there's more than one of us, which one I am. So yeah, thank you.
Brett, where are you talking to us from right now?
I live in good old sunny Miami, Florida. And because it's January, it is paradise.
Can you tell us what kind of practice and what kind of a business that you have in your words?
Of course. So my law firm, which I started in 2011, it started out as a litigation firm, so commercial litigation. And I got tired of waiting for people to get sued. So I started doing the business planning side. So it's business, corporate, keep people out of court if we can, or we litigate, when necessary. And we also do franchise law. So we help people that want to get into franchising or people who are, going to be a franchisee.
How long have you had this kind of practice?
So this is coming on will be 14 years this coming November.
Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, small suburb of Albuquerque, actually. So there's the few, the proud, the New Mexicans, not a lot of us.
Is that where you went to high school?
Yes. Yeah.
Where'd you go?
A small little town called Belen High School. Famous for nothing, unfortunately.
When you got out of high school, you went to college. Where'd you go there?
Yeah. Eastern New Mexico University. It's a communication school on the New Mexico-Texas border. It's also where my folks went and where they met. And my brother and I also went there. Very, very fun, small little farming town, but I had the time of my life, that's for sure.
What sort of things did you do to have the time of your life there?
I was president of my fraternity. I was student body president. I think I got 2 Bs the whole time I was in school. I played intramurals until I couldn't anymore. I mean, I did it all. I really took advantage of those years, had a great time.
Now, at some point, you left college, graduated from college, and went to law school. Did you take any time off between college and law school? Or did you go straight through?
I'd say kind of. I took an extra year in college to do a victory lap. So I stayed 5 years. I had 3 to 6 hours each semester that last year, just having a good time, extending my student life. And then I went straight to law school from there. So it was 5 years undergrad and 3 years of law school.
And where'd you go to law school?
University of Miami. Go Kings.
And then you stayed in Miami.
Yeah. Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience as an attorney from the time you graduated from law school and bring us up to the point of what you're doing right now and what that evolution was?
Sure. I started a very small firm in South Miami, and there was one attorney, one associate, and then I was a clerk in law school, and then they hired me to stay on. So, it's good experience, but at that firm, they did everything. So one day I was a personal injury attorney. The next day I was defending a med mal claim in probate court the following day. And then, commercial the next day. So because it was door law, anything that walks through the door, at first I thought, well, this is great. It's always interesting. And then after a few months and, maybe a few years, I was like, well, I'm just not really good at any one of these things. And it feels like I'm just, not really learning. And I had, he had talked to me about maybe becoming a partner in the future. And I don't really know that, that's like a firm that was just really run like one guy working real hard. And that's kind of how he made it work. So, I eventually, 3 years in, when I was 29 years old, I felt like I really wanted to do something before I was 30. So I cut out of there, hung my own shingle, and did everything myself at Trembly Law Firm for the first 2.5 years. Almost ran myself into the ground. Started hiring. Somebody finally convinced me to hire, and that's when the firm took off. Just really started capitalizing on finding a way to delegate and get more done without me having to do it. So for like 7 years, we were growing, 50 to 100% every year, just really exploding. We were up to, I think, 11 or 12 attorneys. And when the pandemic hit, they hit small businesses pretty hard. So we have still grown since then, but it's been a lot slower. We've got, I think right now, 8 attorneys. And, our mission is to protect the economy one business at a time. We believe that small businesses provide the majority of the workforce here in the US, and that we need to protect those businesses. Not necessarily like they're under attack from small businesses, but business owners, we have a target on our back. So everyone thinks we're loaded. So we're always getting, hit up for donations and this, that, and the other. They don't realize that as a growing business, growth eats cash, or that margins are small. Employees, there's a subset of lawyers that all they do is convince people to sue their former employers for overtime. So you've got landmines that way. You've got business dealings and contracts that you got to help your clients with. And then sometimes, you end up in court, and it's really heartbreaking when a business owner defends him or herself and wins, but spends so much money that it feels like a loss. So, that's what we do. We navigate those challenges, and we do a great job, and really love the firm, and we've built a great team. And, through that experience of hiring and growing and building, I, with another attorney who is a very good friend of mine, and we're now business partners, we started Get Staffed Up. It's virtual staffing for lawyers and law firms, because your staff will always be one of your biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge. How to find really great people, how to keep them. And when you're hiring domestically, the cost is so great that it's hard. It's scary to hire and to keep adding that payroll, and to wonder, well, how am I going to get paid? Because cash flow is an issue at most businesses, but law firms can be very hot and cold, up and down, and have really good months and bad months. So we are finding really great people out of Latin America, placing them with law firms. And that's been a very rewarding thing that I've done in my career.
When you say you're placing people from Latin America with law firms, is that virtual, or so people are able to work virtually for law firms, and they're from, Brazil or Argentina or Central America?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, that's worked out for me in some ways too. Not so much for my practice, but for the podcast. The gentleman who helps me a lot with my editing lives in Brazil, and we have a wonderful relationship, and it's really good. I wanted to ask you, what made you decide to go to law school? When did you first start thinking about being a lawyer? And then when did you decide, I'm really going to do this? I'm really going to fill out the application, send in the money, and take the LSAT, the whole process. What was that like?
Oh, I mean, I say this with all sincerity. I didn't love studying. I didn't love taking the test, but I liked being a student, because I wasn't quite ready to grow up and just have a job and be mature, if that makes sense. I just really like to just have a good time. And so I know that it's kind of funny to say to go to law school to have a good time, because everyone thinks law school is this really, really difficult thing.
I had a good time in law school.
There you go. Then that's fun to hear. That makes 2 of us, right? There was some people that quit, and that they were so stressed out, and I never showed up like it was this big competition. I'm like, I'm in Miami, I'm young, I'm going to have a good time. I always say, I almost graduated with honors anyway. I was like a point whatever away. And I always say, like, if they had a weighted curve for amount of hours that you studied and grades, then, I should have been valedictorian. Yeah. I just really, And I did think that a legal background would be really good in business. And I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur and a business owner.
What is it that you really like about practicing law?
I really love helping business owners find solutions that weren't apparent and helping them avoid landmines that are apparent when you've been doing this for a long time. So I'll give you a quick story. We had two guys who were running a company come to me, and they were older than me. And I have had some experience with some very tough personalities, and they were dealing with just a really strong personality who convinced them to give up a portion of their business. And he was, quite literally bullying them into taking the rest of their business based on some really shoddy paperwork that he had put together, that they had signed. And, I told them, guys, you're in the right place. I'm going to go to bat for you. And I did. And then, I was hiring at that time, so did the other lawyers at the firm, but we were able to, basically two gentlemen who are still good friends of mine now, save them from having their business and their livelihood that they've been working on for 30 years, just taken away from somebody who's just a stronger presence. And those things almost seem like, well, how could that happen? And that could never happen to me. But you'd be surprised at some of the wild stories out there and how many scams there are, how many just people who are only out for themselves and are trying to really one up other people and who just have no conscience. And it's one of the feel good stories of many. I really love helping protect people.
I want to talk a little bit about the get staffed up side of your business.
Yep.
I know that one of the things that you really emphasize is should be lawyers, and lawyers should practice law, and lawyers should do what they have to do, but that they don't have to do, nor should they do everything. And I know that you told a little anecdote about, if you called a surgeon's office because you needed surgery and the surgeon answered the phone himself and made the appointment for you, you'd sort of wonder about that. And I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a pretty good example because you and I would run the other way. We were like, why is this doctor on the phone? This guy must be sitting around. He must be such a bad doctor. He's sitting around with no business. And we are unintentionally creating the same perception in our potential clients when we answer the phone or we give away our time or we give away free consultations with our time. Some successful firms have free consults, but that's with a consultant or, not one of the attorneys. So the lack of business sort of sense and savvy and acumen and lawyers, we got good grades and we went to school, and school teaches you how to take tests and get good grades. It doesn't teach you how to be a business owner at all.
That's for sure. And that's something that I talk about all the time on this podcast, is how I think it is just malpractice on the part of law schools to not teach lawyers something about being business people. But I digress. Please go on.
Yeah. We could dive into that. And, I think that so many lawyers then start their own firm and they have a laptop and they can do the legal work, but they just don't understand because it's not innate and it's something you can learn. And most people are capable, but you've got to learn that you have to either network or market or somehow get clients or get people interested in being your clients, take them to a website. And then when those clients are interested, they're going to call you and ask for more information. They're not going to just knock on your door and say, I don't know you, but here's a check. I want to work with you. So that is called a sale. And once you make the sale, which for some people is a dirty word, but it's not, they hired you to solve a problem for them, right? So then you have to deliver on the legal work and then you have to get paid. The amount of lawyers who do the work, but don't like to send invoices. So they delay, they feel bad. And then months and months go by. So they send a much bigger invoice than they should have. And then they feel bad again. So then they discount their services and, just a self-perpetuating misery is astonishing. Any room I've ever been in, half the room has that, small lawyers has that story. And there's so many simple ways to just help people have a much better experience and really enjoy being a lawyer instead of being overwhelmed by the law firm.
So speaking of staffing, you have a firm that now has 8 attorneys. I'm sure there's some additional support staff. If a lawyer is kind of starting out in a private practice, let's say they've come out of a government job or corporate job or big firm job, and they've decided I'm going to go into some area of law that interests me for kind of a more boutique practice. What's the first staffing decision that needs to be made? And then how does the next staffing position build on that? And I know that this is something you've given a lot of thought to, and I'm wondering if you could talk about that process.
Yeah. When somebody like me comes out with a book, I'm not famous. I don't know how to market a book. I didn't get a book deal. You give it away, you send it out. Some people read it. I put
You
my
have a
heart.
book, I take it.
I put my heart in.
I know you have a book. What's the name of the book?
It's called 24 Months to Freedom. I make the argument that in 24 months, if you do the right hiring at the right time, I mean, it's not always linear and perfect, but you should have something that looks like a pretty well functioning law firm that gives you the freedom to not to retire, not to just, be on a boat all day, but to make decisions consistent with your values because you're not just struggling for air constantly.
So take us through, an ideal 24 months.
Yeah. So the first hire any service business owner, and which is a law firm, should make, and from day one, is an executive assistant. That is somebody that's going to allow you as a solo attorney, instead of billing 1 hour per day, right, to bill 2 or 3 or 4 hours per day. That will double or quadruple your output. I talked to a lawyer this past weekend at my son's birthday party who's like sleeping 3 hours per night. And I'm like, if I had hair, I'd be pulling it out. I want to help so bad because it just doesn't have to be that way. The most valuable resource any business has is the time of the owner. And you need to protect that time. And an executive assistant will save you from licking your own stamps. Like you mentioned, somebody edits your podcast, and that's great to hear because if you spent, 3 hours editing your podcast, that's 3 hours you could have been booking more. You could have been planning what to do with them. You could have been thinking about the marketing, and someone else can probably do it in 30 minutes anyway, better than you, right? And it's the same example of a lot of the admin tasks in a law firm. So after that, you've got to, I would argue, you need a marketing assistant or a receptionist, if the phone's starting to ring, depending on the type of practice you have. And then maybe, so maybe hire the receptionist so you don't ruin all the leads you're getting. Then a marketing assistant, because now you're starting to get more, business, and you need that to continue to flow so you don't have ups and downs. And then you want to get an intake person who can convert the people that call into paid consultations. And then you want to get a billing clerk. And I don't have billing clerk second, although if you could only hire two, I would argue hire a billing clerk and executive assistant, because again, you can make a decent living as a lawyer, billing 3 hours per day and collecting 90% of it. Instead, we bill 1 hour per day and we collect about 55% of it. That's what the stats bear out.
Is there anything that you know now that you really wished you had known before you got into the practice of law and the business of the staffing company?
I wish I had known that the worst part of practicing, being a litigator anyway, is opposing counsel. I always felt as a young lawyer, the older lawyers, really scapegoated and blamed things and like just grouchy with all these young lawyers. And I understand, the whole generation blaming, and now people my age are starting to, say bad things about it. Like it'll never stop, but, just to not take things personally and to just do the job and not let it get me riled up. Like early on, a big case, I'd get an email at 11 p.m. on a Saturday from opposing counsel threatening sanctions, and it would ruin the rest of my weekend, and those things aren't fun. So, I wish there was somebody to kind of mentor me a little bit more on that side of things.
I want to shift gears here a little bit, Brett. What's your family life been like, and how has practicing law fit in with your family life, and your family life fit in with your practice?
Not well early on. My wife and I made a deal. I would take care of the bills and she would take care of the kids. And I did a lot of figuring out how to pay the bills early on. Now, because of, our sort of motto at Get Staffed Up is delegate your way to freedom. I really have a lot of freedom to choose when I want to work and what I want to work on. And I see my kids a lot. We take a lot of vacations, we travel, and I'm sure I could be more helpful around the house, of course, but in terms of spending quality time with my children, I don't want to say blessed, because when you say blessed, it sounds so passive, like somebody chose me to live a life and didn't choose someone else. I made decisions to put myself here, and those decisions had positive, repercussions that allowed me to get here. And I think it's more about decisions and investments and, strategic decisions and having mentors and trying to do the right things than it is to say like, oh, I'm just blessed, I just got lucky. We went to Europe for 11 days over Thanksgiving. I took my mom, as like a special gift. I'd always wanted to take her back to Europe because she hadn't been since she was 20, so like 50 years. And like, that is an amazingly fulfilling thing that I was able to do, and take my wife and my kids. I would have never been able to do all that had I not gotten out of my own way, started reading the right books, meeting the right people, and started hiring.
What about recreational pursuits? Is there anything that you like to do for yourself to get your mind off of the law?
Sure. I don't think that I am good enough at poker to be a professional poker player, but I would love to play more poker tournaments. It's kind of like, I would love to golf and play more poker and do triathlons so that I could stay healthy. But, you also have 2 businesses and 3 kids, so I can't do it all.
Is there someone, living or dead, who you'd like to meet?
Winston Churchill, without a doubt.
Why is that?
The guy saved Europe. He saw things no one else could see. He was not only smart, but clever. And, maybe everything you read about him is like he said, history will be kind to him because he intends to write it. So maybe he did manipulate his own story, and that's why I think he's so great, but it worked, and everything I've read about him is quotes. And, I really think that he was the right person at the right time.
Let's say you came into some real money, $3 or $4 billion. What, if anything, would you do differently in your life?
I would create at definitely my college, Eastern New Mexico University, which I mentioned, but I mean, that much money at others. I would create entrepreneurship programs. So instead of just doing, and it takes a lot of money, right? You probably build a whole building, hire faculty. You're talking about, tens of millions of dollars at each one, if not more. But, and I would try to bring in as guest speakers, like really high-end entrepreneurs, to push more entrepreneurship in college and not just like get grades, math 101 and all these things that we learn. And then we go into a major. I know there's obviously business majors, but I think that, the types of MBA programs are, they're bigger businesses than finance. And what about the creators in the world? I'm in an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization, which is founders of companies that have reached a certain financial threshold. And there's really cool, amazing people. Now, I understand the common thread I wish we pushed people towards the entrepreneurship route more than we did the, get grades and then go get a job, because now they have a degree, you're entitled to a job in the workforce. And if you don't, you complain about the economy. It's like, take your fate into your own hands.
Let's say you had a magic wand, there was one thing in the world you could change, the legal world or otherwise. What would that be?
I wish that judges would be more standard. Like, you go in front of one and you get one ruling, and you go in front of the other and you're treated a totally different way, and they're human.
What keeps you up at night?
Oh man, for a little while it was AI and what AI is going to do. I think it's going to eventually kind of wipe out law firms, especially transactional ones, which is about half of our practice. I think it's going to cause a lot more people to malpractice, and it's going to cause a lot of problems in the legal world before it creates solutions. I just got to be honest, if anything keeps me up at night, it's a personal problem with the kids or something that affects my life.
Is there any book or movie about the law that you would recommend to people?
We all had to we read a civil action before I started Civ Pro in law school.
That's one of mine. I only
Yeah.
have 3, but that's
Okay.
on my list.
That's my favorite. But the one I'll watch every year is A Few Good Men. And I know it's made up. I know it's not, but like, I really, in law school, I was on the trial team, and I love the courtroom battles and the mental warfare, the mental chess that you had to, and in law school, you really got to play it up because, only 2% of cases go to trial in the real world. And so those two jump out at me. What are your 3?
A civil action, 1L about the law school experience, and Bonfire of the Vanities by Tom Wolfe, because that really, I think, gets the criminal justice system.
Yeah. Cool.
And very little else that I've ever read, involving law or lawyers that strikes me as in anything other than just fantasy.
Right. Right.
If someone wants to get in touch with Brett Trembly, what is the best way to do that? Either to contact you about business litigation or about getting staffed up?
Yeah, absolutely. Just LinkedIn. You send me a message on LinkedIn, I'll see it, add me, and we can communicate that way. That's really a great platform. Emails get lost. I have my assistants sorting my email, and I guess they don't get lost because we know where they go, but it's not my favorite. Like, getting myself out of email was one of my big professional wins, that's really made a big impact on my life. So
Talk about that a little bit. What do you mean getting yourself out of email, and how did you do that?
I teach an email delegation system where you have an assistant. Again, you have to have an assistant. This is what it comes back to. Most lawyers, we live in email all day, and essentially you could spend 5 hours a day just emailing clients, opposing counsel, and feel like you're busy and not getting anything done. So back in the day, right, mail came in. The mail was not opened by you. It wasn't taken out of the mailbox by you. It was someone else. That person opened the mail, and they were taught how to sort the mail. This is junk because it's an advertisement. This is an opportunity I may be interested in, but I don't need it to interrupt my day. I don't need to see it. These 5 pieces of mail are from, opposing counsel or lawyers or, judges or whatever. So I need to see this, but only when I'm ready. So then at 1 p.m. or 2 p.m. every day, you had your mail time. They brought in the mail and either like read you the mail or gave it to you, or you could, like, for example, Lewis, so-and-so said this, and you say, tell them this. And you just spent 30 seconds on that. And, you can get through the mail in like 10, 15 minutes. And that's what you can do with email too. You can do the exact same thing. You can print them all if you want to be a little bit exaggerated to learn, which I did in the beginning. You can create email folders so that everything you don't want to see goes somewhere else and you only see what you need. And then you can have your assistant respond and teach them how to respond to a lot of emails. And the ones that are very important, those 3, 4, or 5 are waiting for you for a specific time every day.
Brett, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched on, that we haven't discussed?
I wish I had a good comment here, but you asked a lot of interesting and different questions. I read some, the advanced questions we may talk about, Lewis, but not these past 5 at the end. So I'm having to think on my feet here, and I think it's better that way. They're pretty good.
Brett Trembly, thank you so much for talking to me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Lewis Goodman.
Go back and forth on the legal work, or you can hire that person virtually, promote them to paralegal eventually. There's a lot of different ways depending on how you function as a business owner.